Nick wants to argue that abortion should be illegal. Hi, Nick. You're on with Tracy and John.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
What do you got for us?
Well, I think abortion should be illegal. I think all humans have the right to life, and parents have a duty to support those children until they're viable in someone else's hands.
Until they're viable, and then what happens?
Well, if they want to, I guess, give up their parental guardianship, they can to the state. But before then, I think.
What if the child is born not viable? What is their duty?
Well, I mean, I guess all I'm trying to say is if the parent can do some, I guess they have a natural, ordinary duty to keep that child alive until they can get it. Obviously, if they can't, they can't. But, I think they have, a duty to keep that child alive until they can give it to someone else.
Okay, so you would say then that if John has a child and that child is born not viable and it needs tissue organ donation from John, that he should be legally compelled to donate?
No, I think that would be an extraordinary thing.
Why?
Oh, because John's organs are meant for him.
Why wouldn't the mother have the same? Why wouldn't the same apply to her?
Isn't her womb an organ that she has the right to?
All her organs, her lungs, her heart.
But it's meant for her offspring.
But what now?
That's the difference.
What about it?
The womb is meant for her offspring.
But you're saying that you don't care whether she consents or not. Like her consent is irrelevant. That she should be forced to gestate whether she wants to or not. Is that correct?
I mean, I guess you could phrase it like that. I mean, could I give an analogy?
Well, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. I don't know if an analogy is necessary. I think I get what you're describing. I don't think I'm having trouble understanding you.
Yeah, but would it be all right?
I think. Go ahead.
Wait, let me ask before you do. Is this analogy going to compare a woman to an object?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It'll actually include the same people I'm talking about.
Okay, all right, that's cool.
So let's say that a woman is let's say she lives out in the country and she's pregnant and a storm hits and she can't get to the hospital and she was planning on going to go get formula somewhere. She can't get that either. She gives birth. Do you think that woman has any sort of legal obligation to breastfeed her newborn, or do you think that newborn, she can just let that newborn starve because it doesn't have a right to her body?
Yeah, I think that once you have decided to have the child and you're having the child and you have the child, that you have adopted parental responsibility. Once the child is born, she is the legal mother. So yes, she is obligated at that point.
So she would have to she would have to use her breast milk to.
Right. People that are parents under law have a requirement to not starve their children, but I don't see how this is relevant to a pregnancy.
Well, I think it's pretty relevant because to me it seems more similar to pregnancy than the organ donation.
Well, no, because a person who's pregnant is not doesn't have any legal parental obligations. We have legal parental obligation once the child is born.
Right. So I'm arguing that we should change that law. Does that make sense? That we should give the unborn legal rights as well to that parental obligation.
So you're arguing that the state then should compel women to let somebody else use their body without their consent, that their consent is not required to use their bodies?
Well, you just agreed to that in the breastfeeding example, didn't you?
No.
Wouldn't the state be compelling the woman to let that newborn use her body for breast milk?
No, what the state compels her to do is to not starve her child.
Right, but that by doing that, it's telling her that she has to give that child her breast milk, which is part of her body.
She's not starving the child. This isn't about her donating her kidney, all right? You're saying that she should be compelled to make donation of her body to someone who requires it because they're non-viable, whether she wants to or not. You would not make the father do this. You would just make the mother obligated.
Right. It's biology. I wouldn't say, I guess you can blame it on Mother Nature, whatever you want to say, but just like in the breastfeeding example, the father couldn't feed that baby. The mother has to.
Right, but if the father was there and the mother wasn't, and they had no access to her, he would have to feed the child as well. So we were talking about equality there, where both parents would be equally obligated. But what you're arguing is that we should obligate women to donate their bodies, and that the state should compel them to donate their bodies to help somebody who's non-viable become viable. But if the child is born non-viable and we require a body part from the father or a donation, even a blood, you're saying even a pint of blood, this man should not be compelled to donate. But yet the mother has to donate her body, right? Her whole body is going to be used. She's going to have a person inserted into her uterus. It's going to be, there in her uterus, growing for almost a year. And you're saying that this should be something required of her that she has no consent to and she does not have to agree to, and the state can force her to be used by another person, have her body violated in this way, put her life and health at risk, and that she should have no say in this whatsoever. But the minute that child is born, if it's still non-viable, the father has zero obligation.
Well, you just agreed that you'd be willing to, even if the mother did not consent to breastfeeding that child.
It's not about consent to breastfeeding. It's about consent to not starve it. That's the part you're not getting.
Okay, but is that child viable without the mother's breast milk?
Nobody's viable if they can't eat. That's the whole point. We're talking about the equity of a situation here. But what you're basically saying is that you should have to give your body to make something viable that's not, right? And that you should be compelled to do that, but only if you have a uterus. If you have a penis, you should not be so compelled.
But you're saying the same thing with breast milk.
No, I'm not saying the same thing with breast milk, okay? Neither parent can starve the child. Neither parent. If they can feed that child, they need to feed that child. They are obligated because they are parents, right? But we don't obligate people as legal parents. They do not have parental obligations prior to the birth of the child. They are not required. The father, for example, is not required to feed the child during pregnancy, right? And so there's the idea that once the child is born, the biological parents, unless there's been other arrangements made, I know that we do have, but in general, the people that are the biological parents are usually considered to be parentally obligated, right? So if the mother needs financial help and she goes for financial help, they'll tell her, name the dad. And she has to give up the name of the dad, and then they'll go after the dad for that financial support because the state views these people as obligated once that child is born. Prior to the child's birth, nobody has this obligation. No one has it.
Yeah, well, okay.
Nobody disagrees that already born people have a legal right to life. I don't think anybody disagrees.
Well, I have issues with right to life. I have some issues with right to life.
Okay.
But because I'm not sure that anybody has it to the extent that we're talking about. Right? Like nobody, I don't have a right to compel either of my parents to donate blood or tissue to me to save my life. And what you're basically saying is that if a child is born non-viable, the father should not be compelled to donate even in ways that are severely less risky than what you want to force a woman to do, right? Or a person with a uterus. You want to take a person with a uterus and you want to make them put their life and health at risk to distort and change their body in ways, potentially the risks are much greater with a birth than with an abortion. And so what you're basically saying is that she should be forced to allow someone else to use her body without her consent for reasons, because that's what you think.
Okay, but you would agree that there's not an absolute right to bodily autonomy, like in the breastfeeding example, we are in a way taking that woman.
You're confusing not starving the child with how the child is fed. The obligation is not how you feed it. It doesn't matter how you feed it as long as you're feeding it.
Okay.
She's not compelled to breastfeed.
It's a contrived example because you're artificially making that the only way to feed the baby, and then you're saying, well, we're making her do it in that case.
Right.
But in reality, what if she's not lactating? Who gets arrested?
No. I mean, things happen all the time where, all I'm trying to say is in the same way, if I was trying to say a difference between an abortion and like a miscarriage, I don't think the woman should go to jail for miscarriage, but an abortion, she's actively trying to remove that, essentially kill the child, but I guess if you want to consider it like...
No, she's not trying to kill the child. She simply is saying that she does not consent to the gestation. You're saying that her consent about how her body is used is irrelevant.
The breastfeeding.
Oh my God!
And I'm saying
I don't know why you don't understand this. It's not. She doesn't. Nobody's required to breastfeed. We're required to not starve our children. That is a whole different issue.
In my analogy, you are telling her to breastfeed.
I'm telling her not to starve the child, but you're confusing the idea of feeding a baby. You're confusing the idea of feeding a baby with allowing someone to violate someone else's body, right? We're talking about using her blood, tissue, organs, her entire body for almost a year. And you're saying that a person should not have any consent to do that. A person who births a baby has consented to this. Do you not understand the difference? She has consented to not starve that child. The woman who is pregnant has not consented to anything. She's not even a parent yet.
Well, I would consider her a parent. I think you're...
I don't care how you would consider it. I'm saying that the law says that nobody
Okay, I'm saying change the law. I'm saying change the law. The law doesn't...
Okay, so then would you say that so what is the obligation of biological, people with a penis when they are involved in creating that person? Are they now viable? So if the mother, let's say she has an accident, she needs blood and tissue, or she's going to lose the baby, do we reach out to the biological father and say, you now need to donate to keep her alive in order to keep the baby alive because you have this obligation that requires your body and you have no right to not consent to this? Is that what you're saying?
No, because his body, none of his organs are meant for that mother or for that child.
You just finished saying that she should be obligated, right, to donate her body to keep the child alive, whether she consents or not, because she should have the same parental obligations to feed that child or to make sure that it doesn't, to not let it die, basically, just like we would for a child who is at the hospital, right, that is birthed. But now I'm saying, well, then shouldn't the person who was donated the sperm, shouldn't that person be equally obligated in that? Why aren't they a parent? Why aren't they obligated as a parent?
Well, I guess all I'm trying to say is the mother at that point in pregnancy and both after pregnancy, in my analogy for breastfeeding, the only one that can keep that child viable is the mother. And I'm having a hard time seeing how you're differentiating my analogy from pregnancy because they seem more similar. It seems like my analogy is better.
No, because your analogy is you're using an example where the woman has consented, and you're using another example where she has not consented.
No, all right. Let's say she didn't consent. Let's just take this to extreme case. She got raped, and the storm was all 9 months. She had plenty of food.
How about we just keep this in the realm of reality instead of your wild hypotheticals? Why don't we just look at how the real situation works and talk about the real situation?
Well, hypotheticals are useful to see if you're being morally consistent.
They're not useful when someone keeps trying to get away from the... And to be fair, if someone didn't consent to any of this, if they were coerced and compelled, I would not obligate them to anything.
So breastfeeding included?
Yes, correct. I would not obligate a person who was forced to birth a child.
Because that baby was conceived out of rape, you think it's okay for that baby to starve? No,
you basically were saying now she's being kept in a situation where she's like held, right? She's held, forced to birth it, forced to be alone with it. It's going to starve if she doesn't breastfeed it. I'm saying, how in the hell do you get to her consenting to be a parent from that? And if she didn't consent to be the parent, then how are you making her obligated?
Well, I'm just saying parents have an obligation to their children.
They consent to be parents. I'm sorry that you don't think consent is important or you don't understand it. There's a problem here because you don't seem to understand or care about consent or even you don't get why that's relevant.
Well, I guess my argument is whether like a child is conceived out of rape or just conceived with consent, I'm not even arguing that fact because once you have that baby, does that mother can she just let it starve? I don't think it changes my analogy that much.
If you're building an analogy where she's basically being held in a cell by the rapist,
or maybe she was just raped, and then she lives out in the country, and then the storm came, and she was.
Yeah, we're dropping this. I can't take this anymore. I mean, this is just ridiculous. So
the audience approves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. All I can say is Nick made his points. I made my points. People are going to have to look at that and make some decisions on it. So
and this idea that part of her body is meant for this thing that she didn't consent to have in there is really offensive.
It's very offensive.
What do you mean meant for?
Yeah.
It's without her consent, it's not meant for anything except for her.
Yeah. It's like saying your additional brawn as the general, male, is meant to protect that child no matter what, from whatever danger, that you should put your life on the line and, stand in the way of any kind of harm. And I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing. Anyway, the whole, I think it does, though, demonstrate the difficulty that some people have when it comes to trying to ask them to understand consent for people with a uterus.
Yeah.
There are some people who just do not understand. We are so used to discounting the consent of the group that we generally broadly describe as women. And I think it is a social thing to sort of look at them as women and discount them as women. But I do understand, and I just want to be clear, it's like I get that, a lot of people, there are people with a uterus who are not women, and I'm okay with that. But they are, when you're looked at as a woman in a social sense, you're immediately downgraded. And there's this idea that your consent is irrelevant, and it's just confusing. I mean, the caller was confused about why would it matter whether she consented or not? Like how is that even relevant? If you're going to use her body, why is her consent necessary? Yeah. Holy cow. Holy cow, why not just force women into brothels in that case? Like just make us sex slaves and say, I don't understand why her consent should be needed. Her vagina is made for a penis, right? So let's just put them all into whorehouses, lock them down, and who cares if they don't consent? This is what they're for. I mean, it's that offensive.
It's basically saying her consent doesn't matter. It's not important.
Right. What's the difference? The difference is consent. All right. So that's my rant. So let's look.
It doesn't have much to do with atheism either.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird, but this is, whatever. So